Welcome to our podcast today for another episode of Superpower Sidekick. I'm Cinda Campbell,
And I'm Kimang. Thanks for joining
and
us.
we are teaming up with Spirit to lead us to a life beyond our imagination.
Yes, indeed.
But that's actually, if anything, part of it. And I'll lead with that because one of my points and is to be the clear vessel and channel for the divine inspiration to come through, which I know is not necessary. I'm humble. And some of the things that have come through my mouth are way beyond my knowledge. And sometimes I'm learning with you. And that's how I know it's channeling. And it's something I've had a gift with, and I didn't realize it when I was kind of small. It took me a few years to realize it was there and then start believing it and honing it. So, a part of the spiritual path, one pretty big part for myself.
Yeah, I completely agree because I feel like whenever we're just kind of connected and things just come out, and I feel like I'm learning through you, and it's like wow, a different perspective that I didn't know before.
And and the thing is in that environment, I learned through you at the same time. It becomes very integrated, and everything's working together in a better way. That's the difference between codependency and interdependency. That rather than me connecting to you, what are we I'm going to say next, or you connecting to me, what are we going to say next, we're both connecting to the divine to see what needs to come through next. So it's completely different energy and vibration.
Yeah, that's very true because I know when we're just talking to each other, it just comes out really weird. There's like stop and start, start and stop, and then but when we're both channeling and connected, it's very smooth.
Exactly.
Yes.
And sometimes it takes you a minute to get in that groove, and I don't think we can necessarily it that's just it. That's what we are finally coming to in humanity, is being able to step aside and allow that to channel through, because ego's been in the way. I mean, I've kind of had my ego. I got an argument on the internet with a gentleman about patriarchy, and I need to leave it alone. But and honestly, I I just finally had to say, I agree to disagree. I'm so glad you were not hurt by the system that is in place, but I have been. And, I'm going to leave it at that. But I should know not to do it on the internet. And his little response was even kind of innocent, but I had just really been going through something about that. And he touched on it without knowing. And that's just it. So often with conditioning, people will touch on things. I was very aware that I was triggered in the moment that I was sharing, even though I shared something a little bit harsh. It was people do things without even realizing they are supporting the brainwashing and conditioning that's going on in this planet about the hierarchy. And the hierarchy itself is what needs to go. People think that matriarchy puts women on top and we're just trying to gain control. Not at all what's going on. It is about actually removing the hierarchy completely.
So how did he take it when you
He
were
was disgusted with
triggered?
me. He was totally disgusted with me, and told me he was. And this is very normal. Again, condition. You're just hysterical woman. I don't need to listen to you. I'm going to minimize everything you said and not listen to a word. And I didn't expect any other response. That's the difference. Is I kind of knew what I was engaging in, so it is what it is.
Yeah, it's funny how when that happens and then people always said, well, you're just a hysterical woman. I hate that.
But he has stepped in on several of my posts at different times with that Republican view, really quick and really sharp. And so he wants to make sure I know he's Republican and I'm wrong. And he's all this light and love, everything else, and he's spiritual, and he comes off all this other stuff, except for he's really in to come in and argue for the patriarchy every single time. And I'm sure he's not even aware he's done it. That's what's interesting to me sometimes. It's so conditioned in us. And I'm not necessarily even faulting the man for it, in all honesty. There's I have been observing it. I became acutely aware of it when I was a young girl. My dad used to take me to coffee with him, um, at the local truck stop, and it was, it's very ritualistic type thing, really. And it's a whole bunch of Republican men, farmers, and ranchers, and a few railroaders, but generally a very large Republican crowd in these areas. And it was even back in the 70s when he was taking me. And I remember sitting at the tables and listening to these men talk about the majority and the minority and how they discounted and put down the minority. And in the town that I was living in, I think even when I first this was happening, there were actually not even one black person in my school. Now, and that's not necessarily all because of racism, it's actually because we were more rural, and black people of color are more traditionally within cities, and that's partially because they've been kept in poverty, which is a whole won't get into all that. But it took longer. I think I was in the 6th grade before we had someone of color move in, Hispanic, any other kind of national, or not nationality, how what's the word you'd say, but race. Thank you. Sorry. I was just talking about nationality with something else. So the brain got discombobulated a little bit. But, but it was a big thing when she moved into the neighborhood. When this family, I knew the daughter because she was my age. And you see, I adored her. So I remember the talk when this family moved to town. And I remember the dehumanization. And I was young. I was 6, 7, 8 years old. And I can remember all of it. And my dad was probably the only non-Republican in the room, and if he could have, I think he would have gone without any. We had some similarities that we both don't necessarily like either side because it's halves of a whole. So why go into that kind of dualistic attitude? And he did have some of that understanding, but he did go completely liberal, and he would say, because I don't want to see you or your brother on the streets hungry, and I'm afraid if they get to take over the world, not only you will be, but everyone else that I know is going to be. And he would also talk about how they were trying to completely undo the middle class and make it like Mexico, where there's just the higher class and just the lower class. So that way they had more control. And he spoke about all of this. And I don't know why there's something's kind of happened with me just in a couple days, dealing with some misogyny in my own life. Maybe it just sparked it all. But I'm also seeing it as patterns and that status quo. Not this poor gentleman. I might should give him an apology, but I'm actually not going to, because he did exactly what I thought he was going to do. So I'm not going to. And I'm also going to be very careful in the future to just not give my energy, because I also need to remember that whenever I do that, I'm supporting that dualistic attitude too. But I am ready for a new hierarchy, one without one, where it is we all go to source. And it's the only way to end this. Patriarchy was introduced, it's 3:33 my time. Patriarchy was introduced to remove us from our source, to create a codependent capitalistic society.
There's always that us versus them mentality.
It's always, oh my gosh, they're eating the last of the pie, fear based. You all must get your pie now because it's the last piece. I learned how to cook when I was 7. I'm going in the kitchen and I'm making myself another pie. Enjoy. Well, they took away, they minimalize and do things to forget that we forget we're the creator, that our solar plexus, that especially with all the pornography and everything that is out there right now to minimalize women and to put them in a box, is because we understand creation, because we carry it within our solar plexus. So they must control it in that fear-based society, which is patriarchal. And if I play and do that, I'm right there. It's my own fault. But I also am at a place that I want to honor the rage that was brought in a very honest way into my life.
It's very true that you have to feel those emotions, even if it's like rage.
You know, my love and my rage, it's all in one bowl right now. It's not separate. I feel the love for humanity and what I wish we had that I don't see when I look out into the world right now, but that I absolutely know that we can create. And I feel both. And I feel the rage at these brainwashed, conditioned hierarchy. Men are above, women are beneath. White people are above people of color. All of these kinds of hierarchies that exist in our world that harm and hurt people consistently and daily. And it's a warring attitude, and it's not one that we have to proliferate. And then we can choose to go another direction, one of compassion and empathy. And that, women are not weak and we are not hysterical. That we have something that's missing in the world.
Well, that kind of reminds me of that picture that you sent me about how our that took a picture of how scientists were able to measure our frequency, and one
Yeah,
was
our
fear
heart
based.
frequency compared to our fear frequency.
Yeah, so one picture was like fear based and how little our energy is. But then when we have love and compassion and we radiate it out, it's like, whoa, magnified.
It's 10 times bigger.
Yeah.
And we need to remember we are like sharks and whale. Horses. Horses put out an inner, you can feel a horse coming even if your back's turned to them because they have an energy presence. I'm chilling. I got to work with some horses once for therapy, and it was wow, mind blowing. But that was one of the things that I realized, as they have such an aura that you can feel, and they can direct you with it. Much more intelligence than what people give credit, because that's again the hierarchy, and the patriarchal world believe that humans sit on the top of it. And I don't. I think we're in with all the other creatures in creation.
So I think that I was actually talking to my mom about this yesterday about like wherever you go and you increase your vibration to a higher frequency, then all you're doing is just, spreading that love and energy. And by doing that, you're kind of helping others to kind of tap into that frequency too and
I
raise
do think
their
that
vibration.
I think there's 100% a tag you're it. Walk into a Walmart and tell me you don't walk out with a different energy when you're done. And one of the things that I share with people whenever I work one-on-one and things like this is that we are not computers. We are antenna. And especially empaths, because a lot of empaths and highly sensitive people come to me because I'm empath, highly sensitive person. And that we can either be sponge or we can emanate. And that's the two and we really don't have any other choice. It's either or. And even when we are emanating, there is still some, because of just we're all connected to the whole. So you're going to get all the parts too. But that is also why when we choose our focus, we can spread it and it becomes contagious. All of this is frequency, and frequency is kinetic. So anything that you put out there is what you're drawing to you. So if you're going to believe of the spiritual world only from the fear-based aspect of it, you are going to attract every low frequency to you immediately, in my humble opinion. So, but if you face that same invisible world with love, you're going to bring that to you and those beings and that intelligence, and going to source for all of your solutions because they're all there. It's all very high frequency. It We only can receive our whatever level of frequency we can connect. And I've had messages from angels and other celestial beings that literally wiped me out for 3 or 4 days because their energy was so far of a high vibration than my own.
Yeah, so if you go into a place that is a lower frequency, you're actually helping to elevate that frequency to a higher frequency. So that's actually what you should be doing rather than just neglecting that and say, ooh, that's a bad part
I
of
used to
town.
have the curse. I hate
Yeah,
to go to the grocery store. And now I sit in the parking lot for a minute and I work on connection and meditation and increasing my own frequency. And then I put this whole little ball of love all over the place I'm fixing to walk into. And it makes a difference. If nothing else, my attitude's better. Even if it's just, you can call it an attitude adjustment. You're just changing your own attitude. But your experience is different afterwards. And I have to remember that because we've really been in a hard couple days right after an eclipse and a Mercury retrograde. And I kind of went all the way out there for a minute. But what I'm bringing back from it, sometimes our triggers are our message. And what I'm bringing back from it is unwrapping things from, 2 and 3 years old that I did not, some of it I had no clue was there. Thank goodness it's opened up. It also tells me the portal that we're going through right now is as big as I thought it was, because I know I'm getting to the heart of some matters. And these conditionings that were keeping me from creating my own world differently, like I'm working to do. And the only reason sometimes we can't change or we might feel stuck is where we're stuck into our own conditioning and we don't realize that we can change the way that we think.
it really is about an attitude adjustment. Just changing your perspective, and once you're at a different frequency, it's completely different.
To share a person, because sometimes you can't share things without sharing personal. Mike, I love you. I do, and you know it. Um, but here we go. The last few days were difficult. He did the taxes one day and he got pretty nasty and rude with me because we were going to owe. I was like, oh, you mean we made enough money? We finally owe? And there was a little bit of a celebration for me, but he got it. And then when he got that way, I got triggered. And I didn't get triggered a little bit. I got triggered a lot. We've been really negotiating our experience. Things had been going real smooth. I had feeling our connection and our friendship again. And then he pulled this old stuff that he's been doing for years, fear-based money, hierarchy, control. It was nasty for a moment. And it was enough that I completely triggered. I did not fully remember how long my mom shamed and um, guilted me for every dime she had to spend because my father was extremely generous and extremely supportive. And that's really what I carry. And it's what I think in my, sometimes this is a good point that just came to me. And I'm glad this came up as an example is that my conscious mind thinks very much like my father does. But my unconscious mind will go into some of the trauma that I felt with my mom. And so I went into that trigger with that. And I've done it the whole time with Mike, and I never realized, though, that it was an actual trigger with my mom until yesterday or day before yesterday in this last little time period. And that it was actually something from my unconscious. So I know in some way or another that I created that in Mike so I could finish working out that lesson. And I know one reason I know this is because I've spoke to spirit at a time where I had a choice where I could maybe date someone else or try it a different way than with Mike. And one of my questions was, but I'm still going to have to work through this codependency crap, right? And immediately spirit was like, yes. So I knew even if I switched circumstances, it was still going to come up into the next phase that I faced. And I try to remember this with because some of the stuff feels very personal, like when he's mean and angry because he's afraid of money towards me or to my daughter. And it's hard to not take it personal, but at the same time, I actually know it's his conditioned and injured and abused half that is actually doing that too, his shadow side. So I do my best to have some empathy and compassion, but that doesn't mean I don't feel rage at the situation. It's just now I'm really working on channeling that rage towards articulation so that way I can change the situation.
Yeah, I think that whole idea of feeling your rage is important because perhaps back then you couldn't articulate your
And I'm
rage.
not wielding it perfectly yet,
Yeah,
but I'm finally wielding it rather than I consider it a bad thing and trying to suppress it more, which just actually made it like torture me from the inside, which isn't healthy either. I don't necessarily need to direct all that rage towards Mike either, but I do want to direct it towards the situation that I'm trying to unlock.
yeah. So how do you differentiate between the situation and the person?
It's becoming more natural the more I have a better relationship with myself and I have compassion and empathy for my own shadow. When I look outwards and see other people's shadow, I see it in a similar light now. When I hated my shadow and I had lots of that inner critic and itty bitty shitty committee was in control, I completely faulted that other person. And I still hold that other person accountable, but I leave the fault to the divine now because it's too mixed up in the world that we live in, really. But I admit, and this is where I get drawn into, that if you keep telling me you're Republican, you're telling me you do not want me to have body autonomy in this world right now. And I was a pregnant teenager that had been groomed and abused. And although I chose to give birth to him and he just turned 39 and it was the best decision in my life, Um, I want everybody to have their right to choose because the situation sometimes is not ideal. And they're not in no way, shape, or form are they. I'm upset of what's going out in the world right now. I'm having my own excuse me. I didn't even know all that was there, but that I got pregnant at 15. He was 20. He never once paid a dime towards my son's raising. Never. He left us 6 months pregnant with another woman pregnant because there is absolutely no recourse for women in this society, in this patriarchal society. If a man does impregnate us, and trust me, that does happen, and then there's zero accountability on the male side. And right now, there are all kinds of laws going through our country taking away mine and my sister's rights, and they have not even addressed the fathers at all. And I'm mad. And I do want to speak out for the 15 and 16-year-olds getting impregnated by a 20-year-old adult male and not having choices in front of them. And I would do anything to stand up for them. I'm not a political person. I wouldn't even consider myself necessarily Democrat because the society I see doesn't even there is not even a trace of it quite yet in this. I take that back. I see the makings of it underneath, but it's not out in the world yet.
Yeah. It really is infuriating what's happening because it instead of, I mean, it takes two to make a baby, right? But everything, all the
And there's
responsibility.
nothing stopped. And the woman is the whore,
Yeah,
and the
exactly.
man is the
Yeah,
ooh, you
yeah,
know.
right, right. And why is it her fault? You know, why is it her fault that
I
she's
was a
pregnant?
promiscuous teenager. There was a false narrative, and I was. Don't get me wrong, I was. But I was also stimulated into something that was not my choice when I was 8 years old by someone at least 4 to 5 years my elder that did know what he was doing, and I had no clue. And that's another point. And I don't. We will air this. I'm not holding anything back apparently today, but he had consent and I did not. It was framed as children playing or something like that. No, You were 4 years my older. You knew exactly what you were doing, and I had no idea what I was doing. There was no consent. And that is the truth of the world we live in, because that was the first 27 years of my life until I took my life back. As I didn't even know what consent was. I was still having another pattern of coercion because it was so prevalent in my life that I did not know that it's not okay and that it's abuse until the last couple of years. And that's what's going on, but yet they're out there penalizing and even talking about the death penalty for women. I'm irate.
And what's more infuriating too is the women who support that ideology.
And even going into, because it's real easy to attack feminism. I want to say that I love the feminine arts. I actually enjoy doing the dishes and making a home and cooking a meal and putting all my love into it and nurturing my family. And I love children. I was not the best mom, but I did everything I could to improve myself while I was learning, because I did start so young. But at the same time, those arts are minimalized and have zero value and worth. You tell me you don't look out in the world and know that all of that is not valued and not even seen, much less compensated. So, of course, we're going to fight to be able to take a man's job because you don't value ours. So, right now, the whole fight is so twisted. Don't you dare try to say I'm just feminist or this or that. It's too twisted to actually be able to call all that out. My whole crown chakra went off. So this may not all be me. Some of this may have been the juice pumped in, but they do hit on something that my experience can speak to. I don't really look at what's going on, but you can't get away from social media and some of these things. And I really didn't think that some of the fights going on in the world right now were mine. And I'm just trying to do my best to create what I want and share that with others and help them to do the same in their life if that's what they want. But in the peripheral, it's still all there. And I can see today that it's really affected me more than sometimes what I speak out about, because I mean,
Mm-hmm.
and it was all because my husband got mad about money and taxes in our patriarchal system that's hurting him as much as it's hurting me.
Right.
If the truth be told about it, he still didn't have the right to be abusive or tacky like that. Tacky is not the word. It was more than that. But, and I wrote myself a letter. Next time Mike gets fear based about money, he's going to make you enemy number one. Send it. Don't forget it again, because I don't want to go into the trigger. I don't think he's going to heal it before we have that next go around again. Neither one of us are fully out of our conditioning yet enough to control it enough. But I'm making sure that we are not sweeping it under the rug, which is, a lot of it. You don't want to look at that thing. It's easier to can we just stop talking about that? No, we are talking about it. We are having those hard conversations because I am not going to continue living it in my life. But at the same time, I do support him, that I want to create another world that he is not in fear of taxes or money,
Yeah.
and support him and our family to overcome the patriarchalistic idea that we are, my dad talked about them trying to do away with the middle class because of this. We are easier to control if we're scared.
Yeah. I mean, if you just look at society as a whole, the people who have money and power get away with a lot of stuff that the rest of us can't.
And it's so much easier if we're all fighting each other and then they don't have to deal with us. It's part of the whole tail wagging the dog kind of thing. And that's just it. We do not live in a world that is transparent and that the powers in control are transparent. I really am a firm believer that I want to see every single corporation patch that put money in your banking account before I know who pays who, before I know if I want to vote for you or not. And as of yet, they don't actually do that. So I don't like politics because I don't know who's supporting them and who's got them bought out. So to me, mine's not even about liberal or conservative. Mine are the two sides don't work. It's going to keep an unbalanced planet and everybody fighting everybody instead of us coming together in humanity and love and grace and moving forward. This is keeping us in a very stuck situation. And I don't know if people realize that. Oh, but the US was so good in the 50s. No, it was not. Not if you're a woman. Look who you are. What kind of privilege are you speaking from? Because I hear that all over, and that's one of the big things out there. Oh, but it was just perfect when I was a teenager. No, no, I'm sorry. No, it was not. There were big problems then too. And they just weren't spoke about then. That is the difference between then and now. We are in Revelations. It's all being revealed. They can't hide their dirty things under the rug anymore. We can see it, and it's gross and it's ugly, and it's there for everyone to see. I will say that about the days that we live in currently.
Yeah, I was just gonna say that maybe all of this is happening is so that we can all see all the dirt and all the corruption and all the hypocrisy that's underneath it, right?
I met Trump and shook his hand first time in 2008, and I actually I felt Auschwitz and the killing fields of Cambodia. It's just a certain frequency, and it went down my spine. And I didn't think highly of him then. My mom had actually pushed away his bodyguard so we could do it, and I didn't understand why she even wanted to touch his hand. And she was all, but he has money and he's on The Apprentice. I knew then there was, I had that sixth sense. So fast forward to 2000, what year did he, 2016, 17? I don't remember. 16, I think it was. And he was actually elected, by the way, 9/11, because everywhere else on the planet, everywhere but the US, you tell me US isn't a little weird, and because everywhere else in the world does the month and then the day, except for in the US, we do the day and then the month. So he was actually elected on 9/11. One of my friends who knows him very well because she's in the modeling industry and also she's a philanthropist that helps with a lot of charities. Um, she called me the night of the election just extremely upset because she knew him and she could tell he was fixing to win it. She was truly, truly devastated. And I had kind of fell in that hole with all of us, like, oh my gosh, it's done. Oh, I would have never, I can't believe, right? We were all there that night before 9/11. And but there was something about, I knew I was going into a community hole that I didn't necessarily have to go into. There was some kind of a sense of awareness of that. So I sat down and really, really meditated on it. And I started getting some information. I had also met George Bush Jr. And I had got upset because I knew that Kerry was going to be, or he was going to beat Kerry. And I didn't really like Kerry either, but anyway. And I had the message then that they needed the biggest village idiot. So when I sit down on the night of the election in 16 and meditating about Trump, I got George Bush Jr. wasn't enough of an idiot. We had to get the next highest idiot, because what has been going on from the white supremacist, colonistic, patriarchal, codependent, capitalistic world needed to be revealed. And that he was the man to do it, because he's representing all that was hidden underneath. And I can't, we're 8 years almost later now. I can't argue.
Can't
Can't
argue.
argue.
Yeah, yeah. I know. I remember that feeling too, like just so distraught and
That dread, it was palatable.
dread.
You
Yeah,
knew your sister next door felt the same
yeah,
way.
yeah.
Yeah,
Dread, absolute
dread.
dread. But then, if I was to look at it on the spiritual side of it, that was exactly the explanation I received too.
Right. It's funny that I had done this about being pregnant teenager, because I was having prophetic dreams when my son was born. And I had some really strong dreams of Armageddon type things happening, destruction happening as I'm running through the streets, protecting my children's heads, these kind of things in dreams. And it really troubled my spirit. And it was part of probably what sent me on lots of everything, made sure I got on the spiritual path. But anyway, that was one of the things. And I really started meditating on it. And it's something that still sticks out to this day because I actually got back a Hindu answer, but I was sitting in the Baptist Bible Belt of ranch lands of New Mexico in the United States. That I don't know that there's any Hindu teaching for me to have received, but I received an understanding, Brahma, Shiva, and Vishnu, and Brahma being the creator, Vishnu being the nurturer and the preserver, and Shiva being the dissolution and removing the old. Because what happens is we create something and it's beautiful and it's wonderful and it works. And so we preserve it, but we preserve it way past what it's actually beneficial for. So when it's gone past what its benefit for humanity is anymore, then it needs to be destroyed. So that way we have room to build something new. And I received that message at 16 that that's what I came into this life to be a part of. I Some of that was just new to me, what I just said. I mean, I had some sense of it, but it like brought it home and put a bow on it in a different way than what I had full understanding of prior to.
Yeah. Yeah, we are definitely witnessing it all right now.
We really are. We are in a biblical type change time, to use the word that's not really goes along with the conversation, but
But it's not like end of times or anything where it's like the apocalypse or anything. It's more of
I,
like a
I love
transformation.
how you said it. Can I say I love how you said it? Because you called it the end of times instead of the end of the world.
Uh-huh.
Because I happen to agree with the end of time, even though I don't agree with the end of the world. Time is linear and it's very patriarchal. We live on a big clock, one of the most beautiful clocks in the universe. And we don't need anybody to tell us when to get up and when to be active and that we should produce because we are completely going against nature. Using the time clock the way we are using it now, we are going against nature. I think of time as we know it, because we're no longer going to run on that patriarchal clock that is, you tell me the Gregorian calendar didn't change a lot of things in this world whenever that we could no longer use that lunar calendar and the feminine way of doing things. So I think it's actually more of a linear aspect that we're going to go into more of a presence and now and being able to live for the now because we're not in fear of the future.
So I feel like that's more of what's to come rather than the end of the world is coming and we got to stock up on food and water.
If you want to be fear based and if you want to be in that world, because I wouldn't be surprised if there isn't a dimensional shift and everyone that believes in what you just spoke goes into that world and we get to go to another world because we don't have to live that way anymore and figure it out that way anymore. I I know that there is multi dimensions. I have been blessed enough to be able to travel through some of those dimensions. And I believe it's an absolute possibility that we can create that heaven on earth by being the vessel of the divine coming through us.
Okay, so if I want to go to that rather than staying in that,
Rather than look outside and see all the craziness,
yeah,
chaos,
seeing all the craziness, if I
fight
want
with
to go
people
to
on
that,
Facebook.
how do I get there?
Instead of fighting with people on Facebook.
Yes, and getting triggered.
For myself, it's choosing my focus. And sometimes I have to do that like strictly with some discipline in myself. And sometimes it's easy and it flows and it's easy to connect. But I make sure I connect every day. I have a very strong spiritual practice that I've had in place for over 30 years. I want to make sure that whenever I do transition, because this life is very short, that I've worked enough to help souls that have been stuck in this plane. And I want to make sure that I have my eye on the divine and I go back to nature just as I should, and in which most people do. But it's a drive in me. That constantly seeking that higher vibration, whatever it is you seek, you do find. If you seek a reason to complain and hate the world and stay in that, if I just focused on all the men going out there taking out away all the women's rights and them totally have it completely validated within themselves, and look, it's just because the men make more money than the women because they produce more money than the women, and they just keep arguing for the patriarchy. That Where was I going on that? I totally went off on my tangent again, sorry. Oh, but to focus on that higher frequency and what you do want, because we have a tendency of focusing on our worries and what we don't want. We can act our brain is like breathing, and that's why breathing is such a good spiritual practice, because our breathing can just happen naturally. Thank goodness we don't have to think about it, because if we did have to think about it, most of us would be dead right now. So luckily our bodies will breathe ourselves. Well, our brains will think itself. Actually, it's antenna, and you're probably picking up on 20 people's thoughts in your surroundings. But no matter what, it's constantly active. If you're awake, even if you're asleep, your brain is constantly active and it's constantly feeding you a story. Do you like the story it's feeding you, or do you want to change your book? Because you actually have the power to do that. Just like you can take control of your breathing and do the Nadi Shodhana, so the left and right hemispheres of the brain, and bring them together. There's a breathing technique, or like the four corners. I've heard it's box breath. I call it the angel breath, but it's 4 in, hold, or 4 out, hold it out, 4 in, hold it in, 4, and you just keep doing that in a cycle, 4, 4, 4, 4, 4, because it keeps your brain from going into negative worry and shit. So whenever you recognize that your inner critic's going crazy, or your whoever doesn't like what's going on in the world, you can actually go in and just do a breathing exercise where it makes you focus on your breath, and all of a sudden you're not stuck in your brain anymore. And it's kind of magical. And doing that over time can actually fill in those ruts, so those negative thoughts don't keep going back on that same record player over and over again, and a new quality of thought starts entering.
Okay, so then how do you get to the other dimensions?
I don't know, because that's some of that I've just been really lucky in this weird spiritual phenomenon. I started seeing after I had a vision at a Native American place here. I started getting called to different sacred spiritual um, ancient ancestral sites. And the more that I did that, I realized that there had been massacres across this planet on almost every single one of them. There's a deeper meaning, though. It's not just the darkness that I bring in with that statement. It's also that I figured out that the reason why that was done was to lay a veil over portal access portals to other dimensions that our planet, our multidimensional planet, has naturally. So it's part of actually our nature. And the more that we come back into nature with ourselves and with the planet, we start remembering these abilities.
Okay, I
I've
don't
flown
think
to other places.
I don't think my intellectual brain is quite grasping this concept. So I have,
It's hard for the patriarchal, linear, intellectual side of our brain to catch that. It really is. That's one reason to do that breathing exercise, the Nadi Shodhana, where you bring the two hemispheres of your brain, because then you can start getting some of these more multidimensional reality thoughts where you can see that it can expand. and that we're not, the world is way bigger than what we realize. You know, the first time I actually portaled, it was at a place called Chimayo, which is just an hour and a half from where I'm sitting right now. And I was living in St. Louis at the time, and we'd been in a wedding in Reno. And on the way home, I just kept hearing it in my head. I'm like, I'm from New Mexico, and I've never heard the word Chimayo. What is that? So I look it up, and I'm like, oh, it's a ancient site where they kept seeing a wooden cross coming up through the sand, and they built a Catholic church on it. Well, I had had a message in Chateau Lorraine, France, from the Knights Templar that they had been coming into New Mexico through portals in the 1300s before they were massacred off this planet. And at the time, I thought it was completely crazy until I walk up to this church at Chimayo, and all of a sudden, I'm at Chimayo, New Mexico, but in the winter, and I'm also in Chateau Lorraine, France, and a third place, Chennai, India. I've been there before, where St. Thomas was martyred. And I could actually feel the temperature change when I was in India. It was just a flash of a second, but I know, but I'm bilocational, and I've been bilocational for as long as I can remember. I actually thought it was sleep paralysis, but now I realize I was going. Were you at the teal meeting? In the teal meeting, I should. That's all I should have to say. Do you know what I'm talking about with Lumendang? Okay, I was not there either, but I had gone through like where I was paralyzed on the couch. I couldn't wake up. I was constantly being knocked out and asleep. My ex-husband was ready to take me to the mental hospital because I'd lost my mind. And I leave him and I get together with Mike, and you know all that story. And the teal book was in the back seat of our car one time because Kelly had typed it all up. So we had extra copies of it. And it was in my back seat of my car. And I look over and I had wrote the dates of when I had been put out on the calendar. And it was the dates of the teal meeting.
Okay, so when you're going into these different dimensions or portals, is it like having a dream?
Kind of. There is that sense. You know what I mean by sense?
Mm.
That etheric.
Mm-hmm. Like you
Yes.
physically feel like you're there.
And there's an actual vibration. I can feel that the cells of my body are lighter and more effervescent. How do you describe things that have not been described on this planet before? I have found that to be a struggle since I first figured out I had latent abilities.
That's what I'm trying to understand how, because my mind is kind of blown right now and I can't, the only thing that I can see as you're describing it is like in those Marvel movies where they have, they're fighting and suddenly it's a different space and right, and it's changing and
I'll
changing,
never forget being at H&R or H&M in Soho, New York City, and all of a sudden seeing it before Manhattan was placed there. I saw through the portal of time and space, and it looked different. And get this, I get home, and Summer was dying to watch The Sorcerer's Apprentice. That was whatever year that was, right? And we start watching it, and there's a point where he goes to this shop in New York City, and all of a sudden the time changes, and it shows a time from before, a time frame from before.
which you saw.
Exactly. I mean, it didn't show necessarily the same image,
Uh-huh.
but the exact same thing happened, and it actually happened in a very similar effect way.
Mm.
They did a very good job with how they did it. And for years, I would get home from traveling, and there would be a movie about the place I just got home from. And it would be like the biggest movie on the planet when I got home. I remember I was in Italy when they released Angels and Demons or Angels and I can't, you know which one I'm talking about.
With Tom
The Dan
Hanks?
Brown, huh?
With Tom Hanks, the Da Vinci Code or something?
Yeah, Da Vinci Code,
Yeah.
exactly. It was the second of the Da Vinci Code, and in fact, um, Richie Cunningham, I can't remember his real name, Ron Howard, and who you just mentioned, were in Italy when I was there. But what was so cool about it is while I was there, it had a very spiritual event happened at this church for Mary Magdalene. And it ended up being one of the biggest churches that was featured in the film when I got home and watched it. There would always be these different connections. One time I had gone to China and India and Sri Lanka, and I'd been to Italy not that far before, and Bulgaria and some, I don't know, I'd been some specific places, Auschwitz in Poland, and it was 2012 or something. I used a little bit before that, and they did a movie 2012 because is that the year that everything was supposed to go to handbasket? I think that's when it was supposed to end with the Mayan calendar. Anyway, so that's what the movie name was. And what was so funny is Mike was driving a limo for his uncle at the time, part time, to make some extra cash. And it was not Valentine's Day, it was Thanksgiving time. And we had ate Thanksgiving dinner at his parents' house, and the uncle had us drive home the limo because Mike had a job that night. We come in and we have like 2 hours, 3 hours before he has to leave out. So we put this movie in. And the movie starts about a man who's driving a limo part-time, and it's the end of the world. And he goes and picks up the wife and the kid, and you watch all of it as they're basically running from, I'm chilling, all over the end of the world. But the coolest thing is there was times in the movie it would flash to all, because it was like connecting to different people on the planet and what all the different people were going through at the time. And it would flash in these places. And so there was a flash of the Shaolin Temple. I rang the bell at the Shaolin Temple. It flashed a place in India that I had walked. It flashed a place in Italy that I had stood. And I'm watching this flash in front of me, and I'm like, okay, this is too much. It's just too trippy. That movies were being made that completely mirrored my life as it was happening. I mean, the coincidence and synchronicity, I don't believe coincidences, but the synchronicity that Mike was driving a limo and we drove it home and then put the movie in, and we had no idea that that was the plot. And I had that happen for years. That's one reason I know that we're multidimensional, because how else can you explain that happening?
Yeah, sometimes I watch certain movies and it's like there's like a certain spiritual phenomenon within it that I'm just like, whoa, like how did they do
How did they
that?
do
How
that?
did they know that? You know, it's kind of like in one of the Star Wars movies where I think
I'm a
Ben,
huge geek.
huh?
I'm a huge geek.
Yes.
I love Star
So
Wars.
there was one where Ben was fighting his uncle Luke Skywalker, remember? And then so
Mhm.
it actually wasn't him. Luke Skywalker was not physically there. He was sitting on top of a mountain. So when the
Meditating.
yes,
He was
meditating.
bilocational, and I'm chilling.
Yes. And that was like whoa to me because I remember feeling that like he was there fighting, but yet he was sitting on top of a mountain meditating. So he was
That was
transported.
one of because I'm bilocational, that was probably my favorite scene ever put in any movie ever.
Yeah,
I knew from a young age I was telepathic because I knew what my mom was thinking about me. It wasn't good. I had to know. Some of this may be because it saved my life. I had to know these things to be able to deal with it. She did have does have, or I don't know. She might. I don't talk to her anymore, but she did have mental illness. And that may have been one of the things that forced me into that next dimension, was some of the things that happened in my childhood, not just that. But uh, I knew I was telepathic, but whenever all these traffles and the different messages I was getting, and then I'll tell you another story in a minute about bilocational, but I know I have teleported as well. So we are not just telepathic, we are also teleportational. So, and I'm 100% sure I've barely touched this much of the iceberg so far. And these are big things that you have to like stop and really try to wrap your brain around. That's been happening to me most of my life. And you can't imagine how many times I thought I was Delta Dawn delusional, but it keeps happening and it keeps being really right. And I'm like, wow, okay, you're showing me. I admit I didn't know what a ley line was until I had already been activating them for 10 years. I had been working with archangels that I just knew them as either my blue light friends or the angel, or the, I didn't even say the angel, the energy that always told me that there's certain things going to happen. Or and it wasn't until I met a friend of mine that teaches about angels, and she introduced me to the archangels, and I'm like, I've been working with these beings for a long time. I had no idea. I'm not Catholic. I knew they existed, but I never heard what their names were or what their energies were, or but I had been working with them for years. Um, I think I may have mentioned it too. We may have mentioned it before, but a friend of mine came in and we all went to Gran Quivera, and he was telling I think so. So she was the one that first told me about the Blue Nun and Maria Agregeta, that was bilocational and had been in a Spanish convent and had never, ever left. But she taught all over the American Southwest and the native people from this site, Gran Quivera, that I love so much, all the way over to San Antonio, and it's documented by the Catholic Church that she was bilocational. So, and when I found that out, it was a very big confirmation that I wasn't Delta Dawn delusional, that maybe I'm actually onto something.
So how do you get to be bilocational?
I have no clue. For myself, it was trauma, and I found that hole into that other dimension, and that was my safe space. Um, Luckily, whenever I started asking to be able to go there without trauma, I was shown exactly how to do it. I would think that all of us have those keys inside, and the more that we ask inside to be led towards it and understanding of it, the more we're all going to come to more understandings, and we can share in the community for all of our understandings. And I can't, it's not that I go and I go, oh, I'm going to teleport right now. When it did happen, it was like, whoa. And the second time I did it, I was in a hot tub, or not a hot tub, it's an actual mineral hot springs in Las Vegas, New Mexico. And Mike was in there with me. And as soon as I came back, I went, and he goes, we went to Lourdes. He went with me.
Whoa.
Yeah. Do you feel it? Do you feel it? Isn't it
Yeah.
cool? So, and that's the other half of me and Mike too. Just because sometimes I do talk about our struggles so that way I can help others. I don't want everyone to think that that's all it is. We got this too.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So what else can you tell us about different portals?
I don't even know. I'm feeling inclined to some new stuff. So I've been a little bit of a hermit for a while. I've been really isolated since 2017 because of chemical sensitivities. And I'm like, I knew at the time I had a message: do not try to buck up and just deal with migraines nonstop if people have perfume. It was, you need to retreat and not get around anybody for a while and heal, because I almost died from a mattress that had too much formaldehyde. And it made me sensitive to all the petroleum based fragrances. I also at the time had a lot of food allergies or sensitivities that luckily has stopped. I am celiac, so I still can't do gluten, but I got everything else back. There was a point, remind me my point, where was I getting? Um, I actually had a message that some stuff is going to move forward recently, and I've had like 20 different confirmations from spirit, like everything that you've been working for and preparing for in this 7 years during your isolation, you're going to get to take back out into the world now. I started isolating long before everyone else did for the pandemic. And there's so much that we have all the answers within us. And the more sometimes that we are forced into some kind of isolation, the more we can start unlocking those doors. And maybe some of my life things have actually, on one way, it may have hindered me and limited me here, but it's also helped me to undo a lot of third dimensional and believing that we're only third dimensional limitations. Um, but I really do think that there's fixing to be a whole new wave hitting the planet. I actually hear kids, I say kids, 22, 23 years old, speaking about the Great Awakening. I really do think that we've barely touched the very surface of it, that we have a lot more abilities and a lot more connection than what we realize. So I'm excited to explore it. And I do think that even though it's very hard for me to travel like I used to because of these chemical sensitivities, I think I'm fixing to start traveling again, which tells me I'm going to be able to really understand and listen to spirit because otherwise it would be impossible for me to do out there. Yeah. But I've hooked up with a girlfriend. She's a yoga teacher and she also has a priestesshood that I'm helping teaching tarot in her little thing. But a lot of she is sensitive to incense, for instance, but it's in her mind. So a lot of the things she naturally picks are fragrance free because she is slightly affected by it also. So it's weird how, or it's not weird, it's wonderful how the universe it is so synchronistic and it puts us together and starts creating new pathways. That's just it. As things get destroyed, we are going to be creating all new pathways. I had a huge thing happen this week. I needed to fix a schedule for this tarot class, and I had some brain damage in 2017. And I used to could remember every date that ever happened. People could call me and say, "Whose birthday is such an?" And I knew what date and what day they got married and when they first went to Europe, and I knew it all. And now I'm having a really hard time with dates, and I'm just trying to do a schedule yesterday, day before put me into a complete panic attack because my brain doesn't work the same way that it did prior to this injury. And finally, the very simple solution of printing out a calendar and writing everything down and then looking at it was fixed it marvelously. And it was really not that big of a conundrum. But it was because I had had a pathway destroyed in my brain and I'm having to make a new pathway. And I find that is a very good analogy for what we're actually working with on the planet right now.
Yeah, I feel it. I feel that on an individual level too, having to think differently, doing things differently, like not the same old, how it used to be.
It's time to not be working from the conditioned brain, that unconditional running things, actually bringing it into consciousness.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I'm much more mindful of that now too. Definitely.
And you say it's individual, and I had to smile on that because it's so individual and it's so personal, and it's because it has been in my life big time too. And I'm so happy that I do get to work with others in an intimate spiritual setting because we're all in our little honeycombs doing it right now. That's going to just think if we're all doing that, if a good forget all because we're not all doing it. If a good number of us is doing it, that's going to change this planet.
Right. Yeah, definitely.
That all we have to say is I'm not doing it the way that they did it before and start changing generational
Just noticing the pattern and changing that pattern.
pattern. So much of the rhetoric that's in our world right now is also used in Nazi Germany. Almost identical
Yeah. Very
patterns,
word for word.
word for word.
Yeah.
And people do not even see it.
Yeah.
That's conditioning, brainwashing, and it is purposeful to make the status quo continue. But there's forces at play that can't be stopped. And it's because you're individually doing it over there, and I'm individually doing it here, and I know of at least 30 people just off the top of my head that are over there doing it too.
Yeah.
Mass consciousness is real. And everything that we do, we are uploading into this Akashic bank and it becomes accessible by all. So if they need an answer that you've already found, when they connect to source, they can grab it. And a lot of us, that's what conditioning does. Says you're not worthy, you're a sinner. Um, you have to get down on your knees because you're just a horrible person. It is really what we're taught out there. It's very, very um, degrading. And it's keeping us in that degradation because then we won't have the wherewithal to have the self-worth to say don't do that.
Well, that made something else come to my mind, which is that you know how in like Catholicism, you commit all these acts that you think are a sin. So you go to confession and then you confess
A
and then
lot of
you
acts that are actually a part of nature, just to say, go ahead.
the what?
A lot of acts, they're actually just a part of nature
Yeah, yeah.
that are very natural human acts.
Right, right. But
Yeah.
they are considered a sin based on that religion. And so they go to
And that
confession.
judgment
That's
and that
judgment,
morality
right?
and that enforced me morality. Hey,
Right,
look me. I'm elite. I'm more moral than you.
right. So,
While they themselves are suppressing their own natural, that's what causes perversion,
well,
in
yeah,
my humble opinion.
yeah, that's a different issue.
Oh, sorry. Suppression. Anyway.
Yeah. But you know how it is, like you go to confession, you confess
Yeah.
your sins, and then you leave church, and then you go and you do the same thing over and over again.
And you're forgiven by that priest like he has the authority to do that.
Right. And so really you're not learning anything if all you can do is commit these acts and then go and
And it just
confess.
enables you to continue your
Right.
pattern. Same thing we
Exactly.
were just talking about.
Exactly. So it's like, okay, you confess your sins and you repent.
But Jesus came here to absolve me so I can do whatever I want.
Right. Exactly. So
Jesus came here to say you need to connect to source so you can find the truth within you.
exactly. That's what they should be doing, right? But instead,
I have a belief that Jesus was a lot more Gnostic than what he is presented in the world today. Gnostic is all that means. It's Latin for it may not be Latin. I can't remember, but whatever it is, it's a word. I can't remember the word. I'm having it all problems. But anyway,
Episcopalian?
no,
No.
I totally lost it. Okay, I was uh, my neighbor friend took me to the Episcopal church the whole time I was a kid, and it was lovely.
Uh,
I actually really enjoyed it. I got lucky. I went to a place that actually practiced what they preached. But what I was going to say is, all Gnostic means is that one knows and has that knowing. And Jesus, from what I hear when people talk about his teaching, he definitely had that because he was connected to source and he was leading by example. So what do we need to do? Quit connecting to everything out there and connect back because we live in a very codependent society where we do not know how to go to our own source and that we even feel that we have to have someone to get to that source. Now, I understand because I understand frequency that some of the concepts I understand because, maybe a priest stays in meditation and prayer much easier so he can easier access the higher frequencies. I do actually see where some of that was created. And that's where I go back to where we create things and they work because at that time that was needed. But humanity has grown enough that they don't need that intercessor the way they used to. We've raised our frequency enough that we can connect to the divine ourselves. And it's time to remove the hierarchy. Not that we can't be a community to encourage each other to do it,
yeah, it's like the system is set up for us to fail.
because it's conditioning us to actually do that. It's saying you're broken, you're busted, and I'm the only fix, so you must come to me. The definition of a narcissistic relationship. But what if you are a bright being of light and you are full of self worth and your inclinations are natural and you can follow the love in your heart and what you feel without all the fear based boxes put around you? Believing that we're faulted from the get go is 101 advertisement. Tell them what's wrong with it, and I have the product to fix you. So the whole structure of what you just spoke of is just a big advertising scheme, really. And look, you know, excuse me, but there was bloody trail that they made sure everybody followed what they preached. It was also marked in a lot of violence. And a lot of people were forced to believe that way. And if you didn't, you were a savage. The place I love to go to, that sacred site, it actually talks about they were savage. No, they weren't. Let's change that sign. It was a much more civilized society before the Spaniards got here. And I'm not against, colonization was right for its time. I'm not necessarily saying, but it was bloody and it was horrible and a lot of people suffered. And it wasn't just, oh, we were exploring the world. No. You left a bloody trail, and it's time to make reparations by removing the hierarchy that you reign in power and allow somebody else to have their day. I think they can all sit down for a minute and let somebody else stand up. Not necessarily me. There's lots of people that can do it.
Well, I guess we'll just have to wait and see.
Yeah, I think it's happening regardless. So
Yeah.
the trend is there. When I was in the priestesshood and just listen, one of the lines of the songs was "In my love and in my rage."
Mm.
That was sung in that. So I'm not the only one feeling this.
Yeah. 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 I feel like that. The Arizona case or the ruling from the Arizona Supreme
Mm-hmm.
Court. I feel there's a purpose to that. That's putting
To
it
light
out
a
there.
fire. I mean, somebody's.
Yeah. Yeah. So I wasn't outraged by it at all, actually. I was like, okay, it's happening.
It, it's funny because that's exactly how I felt. So when all that emotion came out of me today, because that's actually kind of how I view it, more so because I did live it, and I know that it's time to evolve beyond it. Um, but I think actually a lot of it was I was able to channel the climate of what's actually here right now.
Yeah, absolutely. I felt that.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I felt,
Because I don't even have to be talking. I can be isolated and not even talking to anybody out there, but I can still feel it. And I know, and I can connect to their hearts and to their love and to their rage and see it with them.
yeah, yeah,
And it's real hard for me to get into the patriarchal viewpoint and go, yeah, 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 I feel this.
yeah,
It, mm, it
yeah,
just doesn't, it, it doesn't resonate.
yeah,
I.e., my argument on Facebook that I need to stop doing. Because and that's just it. I want to emphasize that I am not against men in this. I want them to have their power back too, because I've watched men aren't as happy as they might believe they be, because the conditioning does harm us all, not just one side of it.
right. Yeah, it's like that whole concept of, you gotta stand up and be a man. Don't be a wuss.
Yeah,
And that
yeah.
is harmful.
Men need to be able to feel their emotions because most of them don't know how to unless they're chasing a soccer ball, and then they come into a relationship and they're slightly violent because they don't know how to manage their own emotions and they don't have life skills. And that is not helping households in any way, shape, or form. We need to teach emotional intelligence. I would like to learn some more of it myself. If you ever hear of a course, please. That's what I'm asking from my spouse and myself, because when I triggered, that was not emotional intelligence either. I'll take my own hit too. Well, we're in a big portal right now. So there's a lot of endings going on. And it's so funny. There can be these big, huge endings. I've seen things that I realized were a pattern since I was 2. So there was a big ending. And at the same time, we ended up getting back money from my husband's wreck where we thought it ended up being 7 or 8 times more than what it was supposed to be for the vehicle. So, and all that happened in one day. So it's like I'm watching the end of the world at the same time as the new world is coming in. It's kind of a fun, definitely keeping me on my toes. Thank you for joining us. If you would like a personal session with me, I give readings as well as doing spiritual teachings. Find me at syndicate.com and all kinds of social media.
Yes. And comment so that Cinda can be triggered by your comments.
Please. And Kim and I both wish for interaction and you guys joining the conversation too.